Picture this scenario. It's a Tuesday morning, and 65-year-old Margaret is sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at her 401k statement. She's got $847,000 saved up. Not bad, right? For 30 years, she dutifully contributed to her retirement account. She maxed out her employer match, increased her contributions whenever she got a raise, and even survived the 2008 market crash without panicking and selling everything. By all conventional wisdom, Margaret should be celebrating. She should be planning her retirement party and researching cruise destinations. Instead, she's having what can only be described as a full-blown panic attack, because Margaret just ran the numbers on what her retirement will actually look like, and the math is terrifying. Despite doing everything the financial experts told her to do, she's nowhere close to being able to retire. Sound impossible? Well, what if I told you that Margaret's story isn't unique? What if I told you there's a retirement killer lurking in the shadows that's destroying the retirement dreams of millions of Americans, and almost nobody is talking about it? My name is Keith, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, retirement planning, and why so many people who think they're on track for a comfortable retirement are actually headed for financial disaster. If you've ever wondered whether you're really saving enough for retirement, or if you've ever had that nagging feeling that the conventional retirement advice might be missing something crucial, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because what I'm about to show you will probably change how you think about retirement planning forever. Now, before we dive into what's really going on with retirement planning in America, let me ask you something. When you think about retirement, what number comes to mind? Maybe you've heard that you need $1 million to retire comfortably. Maybe someone told you that you need 10 times your annual salary saved up. Or perhaps you've been using one of those online retirement calculators that tells you everything will be fine if you just keep doing what you're doing. Here's the thing that's going to blow your mind. Almost every piece of conventional retirement advice you've ever heard is based on assumptions that were maybe true 20 or 30 years ago, but are completely divorced from the reality of what retirement actually costs today. Let's start with the most shocking reality check that nobody wants to talk about. The average American today needs approximately $1.46 million to maintain their current lifestyle in retirement, not to live luxuriously, not to buy a yacht or travel the world first class, just to maintain the same standard of living they had while working. But here's where it gets really crazy. Most people are still planning based on numbers from the 1990s and early 2000s. They're using calculators and rules of thumb that assume retirement will cost significantly less than it actually does. It's like trying to navigate with a GPS that's 20 years out of date. You might think you're heading in the right direction, but you're probably going to end up completely lost. You know what's even more terrifying? The gap between what people think they need and what they actually need is getting wider every single year. I've seen people who are convinced they're retirement superstars because they have $500,000 saved up, not realizing that amount might last them about 8 years if they're lucky. The disconnect between perception and reality has reached crisis levels, and most people have no idea how far behind they actually are. But wait. It gets worse. Let's talk about something that might completely change how you think about retirement expenses. Remember how your parents or grandparents always told you that you'd spend less money in retirement? Remember that comforting myth about how you won't need as much income because you'll have fewer expenses? Well, that myth is not just wrong, it's financially dangerous. Here's what actually happens when people retire. Instead of spending 70 to 80% of their pre-retirement income like all the calculators assume, real retirees typically spend 90 to 100% of their previous income, and sometimes even more. Think about it logically for a second. When you retire, you suddenly have 40 to 50 extra hours per week to fill. What do you think people do with all that time? They don't just sit at home staring at the wall. They travel. They pursue hobbies that cost money. They eat out more because cooking for 2 people every single day gets old quickly. They might do home improvement projects that they never had time for while working. Some retirees joke that they don't know how they ever had time for a job because retirement keeps them so busy, and busy retirement costs money. But here's something even more insidious about the spending patterns in retirement. People often experience what I call lifestyle inflation acceleration in their early retirement years. After decades of saying we'll do that when we retire, they finally have the time and freedom to do all the things they put off. The result? Many retirees actually spend more in their first 5 to 10 years of retirement than they did in their final years of working. They're making up for lost time, and that make-up period can absolutely destroy a retirement budget that was calculated based on reduced expenses. I've seen retirees who suddenly discover expensive hobbies they never had time for while working. Photography equipment, woodworking tools, gardening supplies, art classes, music lessons, things that seem reasonable individually but add up to thousands of dollars annually. And don't even get me started on the grandchildren factor. When you become a grandparent, suddenly you're buying gifts for birthdays, holidays, graduations, and just because. You're helping fund college educations and family vacations. Your discretionary spending often increases dramatically, not decreases. Now, let's talk about the healthcare time bomb that's sitting in the middle of most people's retirement plans like a financial nuclear weapon. This might be the most overlooked and underestimated expense in all of retirement planning. Are you ready for this number? The average healthy couple retiring today will spend over $300,000 on healthcare costs during their retirement. That's above and beyond what Medicare covers. And if you're thinking, well, I have good health insurance through my employer, I hate to break it to you, but that probably disappears when you retire. Here's what makes healthcare costs so particularly devastating for retirement planning. Healthcare inflation consistently runs 2 to 3 times higher than general inflation. While your other expenses might increase by 2 to 3% per year, your healthcare costs could easily increase by 6 to 8% annually. Over a 20 or 30-year retirement, this difference compounds into absolutely staggering numbers. A medication that costs $200 per month when you're 65 could easily cost $600 per month by the time you're 85. And that's assuming you don't develop any new health conditions that require additional treatments or medications. But wait, there's more. Long-term care costs aren't even included in that $300,000 estimate. If you need assisted living or nursing home care, you're looking at costs that can easily exceed $100,000 per year. The average stay in a nursing home lasts about 2.5 years, but some people need care for much longer. I've seen families where long-term care costs completely wiped out retirement savings that took decades to accumulate. And yet most retirement calculators either ignore healthcare costs entirely or dramatically underestimate them. It's like planning a cross-country road trip and forgetting to budget for gas. What's particularly cruel about healthcare costs in retirement is how unpredictable they are. You might cruise through your 60s and 70s with minimal medical expenses, lulling yourself into thinking you beat the healthcare cost projections. Then suddenly, you need surgery, develop a chronic condition, or require ongoing care, and your medical expenses explode overnight. The couples who fare best are those who budget for high healthcare costs from day one of retirement, treating any years with lower costs as a bonus rather than the expectation. Now, here's a retirement killer that hits people like a surprise uppercut to the financial gut. Taxes in retirement. Most people assume they'll be in a lower tax bracket when they retire because they'll have lower income. And for some people, that might be true. But for anyone who's been diligently saving in traditional 401ks and IRAs for decades, retirement can actually mean higher taxes, not lower ones. Here's why this happens, and it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about retirement accounts. When you retire, every single dollar you withdraw gets taxed as ordinary income. If you've been a good saver and accumulated a substantial balance, your required minimum distributions alone could push you into a higher tax bracket than you were in while working. And here's the kicker. You don't get to choose how much to withdraw once you turn 70 and a half. The IRS forces you to take required minimum distributions whether you need the money or not, so you could find yourself paying taxes on money you don't even want to spend yet. But it gets even worse when you factor in Social Security taxation. Depending on your total retirement income, up to 85% of your Social Security benefits can be subject to federal income taxes. So not only are you paying taxes on your retirement account withdrawals, you're also paying taxes on Social Security benefits that you probably assumed would be tax-free. It's like a double taxation nightmare that catches most retirees completely off guard. And here's something that should keep every pre-retiree awake at night. Tax rates today are historically low. The current tax brackets were put in place by legislation that has an expiration date. Unless Congress acts to extend them, tax rates are scheduled to increase significantly in the coming years. So you might be saving money in tax-deferred accounts today, assuming you'll pay lower taxes in retirement, but you could actually end up paying higher taxes on that money than you would if you paid the taxes now. It's like storing water for a drought but finding out later that the container has holes in it. Let's talk about Social Security, because this is where the retirement planning fantasy really falls apart. Most people include Social Security as a major component of their retirement income plan. And why wouldn't they? You've been paying into the system your entire working life. You get annual statements showing your projected benefits. It feels like a sure thing. But here's the uncomfortable truth about Social Security that most people either don't know or choose to ignore. For the average earner, Social Security replaces only about 40% of pre-retirement income. For higher earners, the replacement rate is even lower, sometimes dropping to 25%. So if you're counting on Social Security to provide the majority of your retirement income, you're setting yourself up for a massive lifestyle adjustment. But even that 40% replacement rate assumes the current benefit structure remains unchanged, which brings us to an even bigger problem. The Social Security system is facing a funding crisis that's not theoretical or decades away. It's happening right now. According to the most recent trustee reports, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted by 2034. That's not some distant future problem for your grandchildren to worry about. If you're currently in your 40s or 50s, this is your problem. When the trust fund runs dry, current law requires automatic benefit cuts of approximately 23%. So instead of receiving 40% of your pre-retirement income from Social Security, you might only receive 30% or less. Now, Congress could step in and fix the funding problem, but the solutions aren't exactly pleasant. They could raise the retirement age, increase the payroll tax cap, reduce benefits for higher earners, or implement some combination of these changes. None of these solutions will make retirement planning easier or more affordable. Banking your retirement security on a system that's facing such fundamental challenges is like building your house on a foundation you know is cracking. Here's something about retirement planning that might surprise you, and it's actually good news and bad news rolled into one. People are living much longer than previous generations, which is obviously wonderful from a life perspective. But from a retirement planning perspective, longevity creates a challenge that most people haven't prepared for. A 65-year-old today has about a 50% chance of living to age 85 or beyond. There's a 25% chance they'll live to 92 or older. And for married couples, there's a very high probability that at least one spouse will live into their 90s. This is where retirement planning gets really tricky. Most people plan for maybe 15 to 20 years of retirement. They calculate their expenses, figure out how much they can withdraw from their savings each year, and assume everything will work out fine. But what happens if retirement lasts 25 or 30 years instead? What happens if you're 82 years old and realize you've got another decade to fund, but your savings account is running on empty? Running out of money at 80 when you live to 90 isn't just financially devastating. It's potentially life-threatening when you can no longer afford proper health care or housing. The longevity risk is compounded by the fact that expenses don't necessarily decrease as you age. Sure, you might travel less in your 80s than you did in your 60s, but healthcare costs often increase dramatically. The most expensive years of retirement are typically the final years when medical care and potentially long-term care become necessary. So just when your savings balance is at its lowest, your expenses might spike to their highest levels. It's like running a marathon where the final mile is uphill and you're already exhausted. But here's the real retirement killer, the one that nobody talks about because it's so fundamental that it's almost invisible. Are you ready for this? The number one retirement killer isn't market crashes, healthcare costs, inflation, or any of the scary financial scenarios I've been describing. The real retirement killer is what I call the retirement readiness illusion. This is the false belief that you're on track for retirement simply because you're saving something in your 401k each month. Here's how the retirement readiness illusion works, and see if this sounds familiar. You get a job that offers a 401k plan. You sign up, maybe contribute enough to get the company match, and feel pretty good about yourself because you're being responsible and planning for the future. Each quarter, you get a statement showing that your balance is growing. You might even increase your contributions occasionally when you get a raise. You're doing all the things that personal finance experts tell you to do. You feel like you're winning the retirement game. But here's the problem. Activity is not the same as progress. Just because you're saving money doesn't mean you're saving enough money. Just because your account balance is growing doesn't mean it's growing fast enough to fund the retirement you actually want. The retirement readiness illusion is so dangerous because it creates a false sense of security that prevents people from taking the aggressive action needed to actually fund their retirement dreams. Most people have never actually calculated what they need for retirement. They've never run the real numbers based on their actual lifestyle, healthcare needs, tax situation, and longevity expectations. They're operating on assumptions, rules of thumb, and wishful thinking. It's like trying to navigate to a destination without knowing where you're going or how to get there. You might be moving, but you're probably not going to end up where you want to be. The scariest part of the retirement readiness illusion is that it often persists until it's too late to fix. People cruise along for decades thinking they're on track, only to wake up at age 55 or 60 and realize they're nowhere close to having enough money saved. At that point, their options are limited and painful. They can work longer than planned, dramatically reduce their lifestyle expectations, or hope for some kind of financial miracle. None of these are particularly appealing choices. But here's what makes this even more tragic. The retirement readiness illusion is completely preventable. With some basic math and honest assessment, anyone can figure out whether they're actually on track for retirement or just fooling themselves. The problem is that most people avoid doing this calculation because they're afraid of what they might find out. They'd rather live with comfortable uncertainty than uncomfortable certainty. But ignorance isn't bliss when it comes to retirement planning. Ignorance is financial suicide. The illusion is perpetuated by an entire industry that profits from keeping people complacent. Your 401k statements show projections that assume perfect market returns and ignore taxes, inflation, and real-world complications. Financial advisors often use overly optimistic assumptions to make their clients feel better about their progress. Even well-meaning friends and family members will reassure you that you're doing better than most people without any actual knowledge of what you'll need in retirement. So what's the solution? How do you escape the retirement readiness illusion and actually get on track for a secure retirement? It starts with what I call the reality check system, and it has 3 simple but powerful steps. Step 1 is calculating your real retirement need, not some generic rule of thumb, but your actual, specific, personalized retirement funding requirement. Start with your current annual expenses and project them forward, accounting for inflation, healthcare cost increases, and the lifestyle changes you actually want in retirement. Don't assume your expenses will go down unless you can specifically identify which expenses will decrease and by how much. Factor in taxes on your retirement account, withdrawals, potential changes to Social Security, and the possibility of living longer than you expect. Yes, this calculation might be sobering, but it's better to be sobered now than shocked later. Step 2 is auditing your current trajectory. Take an honest look at your current savings rate, investment returns, and timeline to retirement. Run projections to see if your current path will actually get you to your calculated retirement need. Don't rely on the overly optimistic projections from your 401k provider that assume everything will go perfectly for the next 30 years. Use conservative assumptions and stress test your plan against various scenarios like market downturns, job loss, or unexpected expenses. Step 3 is implementing catch-up strategies if you find out you're behind, and statistically, you probably are. This might mean increasing your savings rate dramatically, working a few years longer than planned, optimizing your investment strategy, or exploring additional income sources. The key is to take action based on reality, not wishful thinking. Every year you delay making necessary adjustments makes the problem exponentially harder to solve. The beautiful thing about facing retirement reality early is that you still have options. If you're 35 and realize you need to double your savings rate, that's definitely challenging, but it's doable with some lifestyle adjustments and commitment. If you wait until you're 55 to figure this out, doubling your savings rate might not be mathematically possible given your remaining working years. Time is the most powerful force in retirement planning, but only if you use it wisely. Remember Margaret from the beginning of this video, the 65-year-old with $847,000 who was panicking about retirement. Here's how her story could have been different. If Margaret had done a real retirement needs calculation at age 35 instead of just assuming her 401k contributions would be sufficient, she would have realized she needed to save much more aggressively. She might have increased her savings rate, optimized her investment strategy, or planned to work a few extra years. Those adjustments made at 35 would have been relatively painless and could have easily put her on track for a comfortable retirement. But because Margaret fell victim to the retirement readiness illusion, she spent 30 years thinking she was winning when she was actually falling behind. Now, at 65, her options are much more limited. She'll probably need to work longer than planned, reduce her retirement lifestyle expectations, or both. The tragic part is that this outcome was completely preventable with some basic planning and honest assessment. The truth is, most Americans are not prepared for retirement, despite what their 401k statements might suggest. The combination of longer lifespans, higher costs, inadequate savings rates, and unrealistic expectations has created a retirement crisis that's hiding in plain sight. But the crisis isn't inevitable for everyone. The people who take the time to understand the real challenges, calculate their actual needs, and adjust their strategies accordingly can still build secure, comfortable retirements. The choice is yours. You can continue operating under the retirement readiness illusion, hoping that everything will somehow work out, or you can face reality now while you still have time to do something about it. You can keep confusing activity with progress, or you can start measuring your actual progress toward your real retirement needs. The math doesn't care about your feelings or assumptions. It only cares about facts and compound interest. So, there you have it. The #1 retirement killer isn't some external force that you can't control. It's the internal illusion that you're on track when you're probably not. It's the comfortable lie that saves you from facing uncomfortable truths. But here's the empowering part of this message. Once you see through the illusion and understand what's really required for retirement security, You can take control of your financial future in a way that most people never do. Don't be like Margaret, waking up at 65 to find out you're decades behind where you need to be. Start today by calculating your real retirement needs, auditing your current trajectory, and making the necessary adjustments to ensure your golden years are actually golden. Your future self will thank you for having the courage to face reality now instead of living in comfortable denial. Trust me, the truth might be scary at first, but it's infinitely better than the alternative.